Don't forget thorny and angular. I've never accepted the word serial because for me it's like the word atonal, which should be only used historically to describe a certain repertoire, the pre-12-tone chromatic music of Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern, I guess, and maybe Schrecker or somebody else, but that's it. It's used again as a pejorative adjective. Serial, likewise to me, means the sort of automatic programmed music written by the Europeans, mostly in the 50s and a little bit into the 60s, stuff which, if you take one look at how they put it together, couldn't possibly survive. Completely arbitrary, they had basically no control over the outcome. That too was made into a special new kind of virtue. We don't know what's going to come out. Isn't that marvelous? I don't think it's marvelous. So the word 12-tone, or the phrase 12-tone, on the other hand, is accurate in the sense that it assumes the use of the total chromatic, maybe segregated into collections of less than every once in a while, and that it is based on ordered sets, sometimes usually involving all of the 12 elements, sometimes more in some sense, and sometimes less. That's a word that, whatever nasty connotations it has had slathered onto it by mean-spirited critics and insecure composers, is a designation that I'm happy to accept. Although, as I've said for many years, if you went hunting in any of my works for the last at least quarter century looking for the row, you're going to have a very hard time. I've always maintained that 90% of difficulty is psychological, and the mere fact that something's been around, even if not played very much, for a decade or two, does something to the attitude that players have toward it when they come to do it, and makes it easier. Along these same lines, I've always insisted, for example, in keyboard music, that there really is nothing physically more difficult than the heights of 19th century virtuosity. But that doesn't seem to bother people because they all think they know how it goes. They may not, in fact, but that's not the point. Their attitude is one of confidence with respect to it, even if there may be digital difficulties. But of course, with a new piece, there's the unknown and unfamiliarity, and when that's coupled with something that may be demanding even a little bit physically, of course, the psychological environment is such as to make it seem much harder than it actually is. I've never considered myself an electronic composer, although there is that one, and there are a couple of pieces that have computer digitally synthesized sound with them, including one version of New York Notes. But those are exceptions. And I have to say, at this stage of both the development of electronic music and my own thoughts on music, that it's about time something interesting happened. We've had now more than a half century, and I'm appalled to think that I was present almost right at the beginning. I wasn't around quite in the musique concrète days of the 1940s, nor quite in the 51, 52 era when tape music began. But very shortly thereafter, I was closely associated with the people who were doing these things, and the propaganda that we received about how this was going to free everything and liberate the composer and make it possible to do all kinds of wonderful things, and on and on and on like that, has never been realized. And I found myself, even very early on, a kind of anxiety developing as I contemplated the electronic medium, at whatever stage it was. Of course, computers were far in the future at that time. Wondering whether people were paying proper attention to the role of live human beings in the dynamic of performance and in the effect that, or the influence that the fact of live performance had on every composer since the beginning of time. This was also fluffed off and dismissed as unimportant, but it seemed critically important to me, and that's one of the reasons why I've never pursued the development of the electronic medium more aggressively than I have, which isn't aggressively at all. I want to write the best possible piece I can. When I finish something, it doesn't mean that I think I've done something that is absolutely wonderful. It means that I've done what I can with it. Then I send it out into the world. And since I only compose, with almost no exceptions that I can think of, for specific circumstances, under specific commissions, for specific performances, the question of who's going to hear it is already taken care of. When I write an orchestra piece, as opposed to a work of chamber music, I am likely to deal in somewhat broader strokes, not because I want to patronize the audience, and that's one of the things, by the way, that I think is so awful about the timidity of our institutions. They patronize the public. They think they're a bunch of idiots who can't be led into anything worthwhile. I think that is really appalling. That is such a bad attitude to have toward your customers, if you want to put it in those terms. But putting that aside for the moment, when I write, as I said, an orchestra piece, I do it in somewhat broader strokes than a piece of intimate chamber music, not because of anything having to do with the public, but because of the acoustical realities of the beast. It has all these people. Inevitably, it has to respond more slowly than a small group will. Similarly, if I write a vocal work, I am likely to behave in a somewhat different way than I would if I were writing a piece for percussionists. It all has to do with the medium and the acoustical realities and the physical nature of what's going to produce the sound.
The heart is a drum has a snare. The snare is in the blood, the blood is in the air. The center must be still, the center must listen to the blood. Listen to the drum.
Why is it bad to say that there, for example, one of my old songs, why is it bad to say that there is art on the one hand and entertainment on the other? We all want both. We all use both. But one is something that the entertainment phase or aspect is something that comes to us without our effort. The artistic aspect requires us to put something into it, as in nuclear fusion, and we get more out of it than we put in. What is so hard about that? What is so objectionable about that? And yet, it seems to ruffle feathers when you say this. I think that there's a kind of cosmic laziness involved in all this, a self-indulgence, and coupled with a deep insecurity that makes people upset by such very simple and to me self-evident notions. Marketing, public relations, these are the touchstones. That's the American contribution to civilization, it would seem. to know how to sell garbage to people who don't know better, and to promote that which isn't worth paying attention to, and something that everybody can't stop talking about. Well, it's all very interesting from a sociological point of view, but not very helpful to those of us who want to try to do something that is meaningful and that is enduring. And in fact, as you know, it has been intellectually unfashionable to talk about high culture for a long time because that's too elitist. And to be elitist means to exclude people from something, all of which is a crock in my view. To be elitist is simply to have standards. To be elitist is to want everyone to reach those standards who possibly can, and to keep no one out, not to debase the standards so people who don't care won't be bothered by them. Many years ago, it was during the 70s, at that time semi-well-known rock musician came to me because he wanted to learn how, he couldn't read music, and he wanted to learn how to write down his songs. And I said, well, do you know anything about harmony? And he said, no, he didn't, of course. He just felt his way around, as I guess they all do. And anyway, I gave him something to read. He went away, and he then called me a little while later and said he's decided, instead of studying, to hire a secretary to notate his stuff. And I said, you have made the right choice, because if you knew enough even to write down, if you could read and write musical notation, if you knew enough to write down what you're doing, you would find it unsatisfactory. If you had knowledge, you would be unable to continue with what you're doing. And this seems to me to be very much the case of popular music today, and has been for a long time. Don't forget the pronouncements of the student generation of the late 1960s, that they, in their colossal ignorance about everything, pronounced themselves the best educated generation in history. And it's continued, that attitude has continued since then, knowing almost nothing about anything. You have now pop musicians who really don't know anything and don't recognize. They regard themselves, for example, as moral colossi who are going to tell the world how to live and what's wrong with everybody else via their immortal poetry. But their musical substance is very, very, very slim, and there is no recognition of any sort of higher forms of musical discourse or musical practice. That is a very profound change, and it's something which, when you then see the pathetic spectacle of certain composers, we know who they are, sort of aping pop behavior as a way of kind of trying to grab an audience that expects to be pandered, not to be pandered to, but to be given entertainment that it can receive effortlessly without paying really much attention to it. You see that we're in a very different place than we were at one time. Now, as interested as I am in chronology, I don't think there's any chronological requirement for the reception of my work or indeed anyone else's. All you have to do is pay attention to it. And that's what seems to be the big problem. People either don't want to or hasn't been suggested to them that they have to. On those occasions when I'm asked to give a little presentation before, say, an orchestra performance of mine, in order to make people feel better, I always get up and say, well, here I am. Sorry, I'm the only non-dead person. I apologize for not being dead. But here I am. I'm a human being just like you, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing, if you don't know my work or don't know the tradition from which it immediately springs, nothing I can say in 2 minutes that could possibly give you any kind of a path through it. So don't worry. Do whatever you do with the other music. If you just let it wash over you, let this do the same. And I find that as an initial initial kind of piece of advice works pretty well. And I think that that's the starting point, but it again requires leadership and a certain degree of honesty and the abandonment of a pretense that there's something that can be appreciated as distinct or disjunct from an immersion in the work in some way, some form.